Ravinder Singh thought the road would save him. Thousands of kilometers away from his home in India, behind the wheel of a Canadian freight truck, he believed long hours and quiet discipline would secure his future. Instead, those same highways recorded every move he made, turning routine deliveries into evidence and opportunity into suspicion. One delayed log, one sealed trailer, and one decision made under pressure quietly placed his name inside a system that does not forgive mistakes. By the time Ravinder realized the road was no longer leading forward, it was already guiding him out of the country. Ravinder Singh arrived in Canada, carrying more hope than luggage. He came from a small town in India where opportunities were limited and responsibilities were heavy. Canada felt like a promise made real, a place where hard work could turn into stability. He spent his early months learning the rules, completing training, and doing every job exactly as required. When he finally secured work as a long-haul truck driver, it felt like a turning point. The pay was modest, but it was legal and steady, and that mattered more than anything. Long highways, cold mornings, and quiet nights behind the wheel became his new life. He learned to measure time in kilometers and rest stops, not days. The road gave him freedom, but also gave him distance. Calls from home brought reminders of loans taken to fund his move and family members, depending on his income. Each missed delivery bonus and each unexpected expense tightened the pressure. Ravinder began to worry constantly about his work permit and whether one mistake could send him back. He avoided trouble, followed rules, and kept to himself. Supervisors described him as reliable, someone who never complained. Its stress showed in small ways. He worked longer hours, slept less, and accepted routes that others declined because they paid slightly more. Over time, routine blurred into exhaustion. Paperwork became just another task to finish quickly. Ravinder trusted that the system would protect him as long as he stayed moving. He did not notice how closely every border crossing, fuel stop, and delivery time was recorded. A minor delay once forced him to adjust his log. It seemed harmless, even necessary. That single adjustment placed his name into a system designed to catch patterns, not people. Ravinder continued driving, unaware that the long road north had quietly changed direction and that his future was already being watched from a distance. The offer arrived without warning and seemed almost too convenient. Ravinder was between regular routes when a dispatcher he had never spoken to before contacted him with a last-minute haul. The delivery window was short, but the pay was noticeably higher than anything he had earned before. The paperwork looked thin, yet nothing on it appeared openly wrong. The cargo was listed as common commercial goods, sealed and ready for transport. Ravinder hesitated only briefly. He told himself that this was how the industry worked, that urgent jobs paid more and asked fewer questions. The pickup location was an unfamiliar warehouse on the edge of an industrial area. It was quiet, with no signs and minimal staff. The trailer was already sealed when he arrived, and he was instructed not to open it under any circumstances. That instruction felt unusual, but not unheard of. Many clients valued speed and privacy. Ravinder signed, hooked the trailer, and pulled onto the highway. As he drove, he noticed the route suggested by the dispatcher avoided major checkpoints and favored secondary roads. He followed it anyway, trusting the GPS and the promise of smooth delivery. At the border, the inspection was brief. Officers checked his documents, glanced at the seal, and waved him through. Relief washed over him, reinforcing his belief that everything was fine. Over the next 2 days, small details began to feel wrong. The tracking app updated irregularly. Calls to the dispatcher went unanswered. A fuel stop delay forced Ravinder to take a detour, and that detour quietly logged itself into multiple databases. The final stop never came. A routine traffic inspection in a quiet town turned serious within minutes. Inspectors focused on the trailer, their attention fixed and urgent. When the seal was broken, the job Ravinder thought would solve his problems became the moment his life in Canada began to unravel. After the truck was seized, the days that followed felt unreal. Ravinder was not placed in a cell, but his freedom narrowed sharply. His license was suspended, and his work permit was marked for review. Investigators began by examining what he left behind, not what he said. Travel logs were compared against fuel receipts and toll records. Small inconsistencies appeared, the kind that meant nothing alone but gained weight when stacked together. His phone was analyzed, revealing short, repeated calls to numbers that no longer existed. The pattern suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Financial records added another layer. Deposits appeared in his account in amounts carefully kept below reporting limits. The money arrived shortly before certain trips and stopped just as suddenly. Ravinder insisted the payments were personal loans, but no lenders could be found. Authorities followed his truck's GPS history and discovered repeated stops near a storage facility rented under a different name. Inside that unit were tools, packaging materials, and metal panels that matched alterations found in the trailer. The evidence began to point in one direction. As the investigation deepened, Ravinder's employer distanced itself quickly. His name disappeared from schedules, and access to company systems was revoked. Immigration officials stepped in, placing formal restrictions on his stay. He was required to report regularly and could not leave the area. Media attention followed, painting him as a key figure in a growing case. Online, his image shifted from anonymous worker to suspected criminal. Forensic teams completed their analysis of the trailer. Fibers, fingerprints, and tool marks linked Ravinder directly to the hidden compartments. The possibility of a simple mistake faded. Investigators believed the job had been planned over weeks, not days. Deportation proceedings began moving alongside the criminal file. Ravinder now faced a future where guilt did not need tea. As authorities widened their search, the case grew beyond one driver and one truck. Data from shipping companies revealed similar routes taken by different drivers over the past year. The paperwork shared the same layout, the same vague descriptions, and the same short-lived companies listed as clients. Most of those drivers were no longer in Canada. Some had left voluntarily, while others had simply vanished from records. Ravinder stood out because he was still present and fully traceable. That made him valuable to investigators and vulnerable at the same time. Warehouse footage added another layer. Cameras showed his truck arriving late at night at locations that did not match delivery schedules. The stops were brief but consistent. Payment records linked him to a logistics broker already known to authorities for operating in legal gray areas. That broker had once cooperated with law enforcement in another investigation, providing limited information in exchange for protection. This connection complicated everything. It suggested the network was layered, with smaller players exposed while larger organizers stayed hidden. Investigators began to question how much Ravinder truly understood. Evidence showed instructions were often vague, leaving room for denial. Yet his movements were precise, repeated with careful timing. Phone data revealed that calls often came just before route changes or unusual stops. Messages were brief and coded, avoiding direct references. The system was designed to limit what any single person could know. The most unexpected twist came when records showed the broker had used immigration fear as leverage. Many drivers in the network shared similar backgrounds, temporary status, and financial stress. The line between victim and participant blurred. Still, immigration law did not focus on networks or manipulation. It focused on compliance and risk. Ravinder's case shifted from uncovering the truth to deciding his fate. Even as investigator, the hearing moved forward with a quiet efficiency that left little room for emotion. Ravinder sat through long sessions where his life was reduced to documents, timelines, and risk assessments. Immigration officials were not tasked with deciding guilt. Their role was to determine whether he remained safe and compliant enough to stay in the country. Every inconsistency from the investigation was placed on record. Delays, financial deposits, altered routes, and forensic links were presented as indicators of ongoing risk. Ravinder's legal representatives submitted evidence suggesting pressure and manipulation. Records showed threatening messages sent from abroad around the same time he accepted certain jobs. The argument was simple. Fear had influenced his choices. While the material was accepted, its impact was limited. The source of the messages could not be clearly tied to the shipping network. Without direct attribution, the board treated them as context rather than justification. Time became the biggest obstacle. Unlike criminal courts, immigration proceedings moved quickly. Requests for delays were denied. A temporary work suspension turned into a full revocation of his permit. Ravinder was no longer allowed to earn income, deepening the financial strain that had led him into trouble in the first place. Reporting requirements increased, and his movements were closely monitored. Outside the hearing room, public opinion shifted daily. Some saw him as a symbol of exploitation, while others viewed him as a willing participant. None of that mattered inside. The decision focused on probability, not sympathy. When prosecutors announced they were postponing criminal charges to pursue higher-level suspects, it shocked many observers. For Ravinder, it was devastating. Without a criminal trial, there would be no opportunity to clear his name in time. The board issued its ruling shortly after. Removal proceedings would continue. Ravinder remained in Canada, only under. As the removal date drew closer, the investigation delivered one final blow. Footage from a small vehicle repair shop surfaced, pulled from an old security system scheduled for deletion. The video showed Ravinder present during the modification of a trailer, watching as panels were adjusted and compartments reinforced. The quality was poor, but the timeline matched perfectly. This single piece of evidence erased much of the remaining doubt. Claims of confusion and limited involvement collapsed under the weight of visual proof. Immigration officials moved quickly after reviewing the footage. Appeals that once carried hope were dismissed within days. Ravinder's remaining assets were frozen, and his reporting schedule tightened further. Each step reduced his ability to respond or adapt. Investigators confirmed that he was not the organizer, but they also confirmed he was not innocent. He occupied a middle space that offered no protection under the law. At the same time, a second driver connected to the network was arrested in another province. That driver provided a detailed account of how routes were assigned and how payments were distributed. Ravinder was described as someone who understood the risks and continued anyway. The statement aligned with existing evidence, strengthening the case against him. By the time this confession reached immigration authorities, the outcome was already decided. The system moved faster than the truth could evolve. Prosecutors prioritized dismantling the network, while immigration officials prioritized removal. Those priorities never aligned in Ravinder's favor. The final notice arrived quietly, delivered without ceremony. He was given a date, instructions, and limitations. No charges, no trial, no closure. The road that once represented opportunity now ended abruptly. Years of effort dissolved into paperwork and deadlines. Ravinder had reached the final stage of a process he never fully understood until it was too late. After removal, the case lost momentum. Without Ravinder present, investigators struggled to move forward against the wider network. Evidence that once seemed urgent became difficult to use across borders. Witness cooperation slowed, and priorities shifted to newer cases. Files were quietly marked inactive. For the organizers, the loss of one driver changed little. Routes were adjusted, companies were renamed, and operations continued with minimal disruption. Back in India, Ravinder returned to a reality far harsher than the one he had left. News of his deportation had traveled faster than he had. Suspicion followed him into every job inquiry and social setting. The savings he once sent home were gone, replaced by legal fees and unpaid loans. Work was difficult to find, and when it appeared, it paid far less than before. The promise that had drawn him abroad now felt distant and unreachable. The emotional weight was heavy. Years spent building a future vanished without a criminal conviction, leaving only records that told part of the story. Ravinder lived with the knowledge that he had been used, but also that he had chosen to continue. That conflict followed him daily. There was no public apology, no acknowledgement of how easily pressure and fear could bend judgment. Meanwhile, reports within Canada identified weaknesses in enforcement. Drivers with temporary status were flagged as easy points of control, while complex networks required time and resources. Training programs and advisories quietly changed, warning newcomers about high-risk offers and anonymous brokers. These changes came too late for Ravinder. His story faded from headlines, replaced by news scandals. Yet for those who study the case, it remained a reminder of how quickly a life can be redirected. The road does not always end where the mistake begins, and sometimes the punishment arrives long before the full truth is known. The story ends not with a courtroom verdict, but with silence. No final judgment declared guilt or innocence in the way most people expect. Instead, the conclusion arrived through forms, stamps, and closed files. Ravinder's name remained in databases as a risk, a reference point for future cases, and a warning hidden inside policy language. The absence of a trial left unanswered questions, but the system did not pause for answers. What made this case unsettling was how ordinary it began. There were no dramatic arrests or public confessions, only small choices layered over time. A higher-paying job, a skipped question, a trusted instruction. Each decision seemed manageable, until together they formed a path with no exit. The twists were procedural rather than emotional, driven by algorithms, logs, and thresholds most people never see. For viewers, the lesson is uncomfortable. Justice does not always move in straight lines, and immigration enforcement operates by different rules than criminal courts. Risk can outweigh proof, and speed can replace certainty. Ravinder's removal satisfied regulations, but left moral clarity unresolved. The larger network adapted, while one individual absorbed the consequences. Years from now, new drivers will follow the same highways, guided by the same GPS systems and pressured by similar fears. Some will recognize the signs and refuse. Others will believe they can manage the risk. The road will continue to offer both opportunity and temptation. This case stands as a quiet warning. Survival choices can become permanent records. Systems remember even when people move on. The final mile of Ravinder's journey shows how quickly hope can turn into exile and how a life can be changed forever without a single word spoken in a courtroom.